Giant, majestic, dangerous. SS Edmund Fitzgerald bobbed in the waves as they grew larger, angrier, hungrier. The November wind, sleet, and sea spray bit at the faces of the crew as they looked on with uncertainty. Their ship dipped and bowed in the massive troughs, with each wave threatening to buckle her amidships. She wouldn't be the first, and she wouldn't be the last Great Lakes freighter to succumb to the weather. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Great Lakes this week. Today we're going to go through a brief history of lake freighters, their purpose, and the industry today. Lake freighters, or lakers, are bulk carrier ships operating on the Great Lakes of North America, and these vessels are generally referred to as boats, although they do qualify as ships. Typically, their hulls are long and narrow with a raised pilot house, and the engine is located toward the stern of the ship. As an overarching umbrella statement, lake freighters have been used since the late 1800s to carry raw materials from docks in the upper Great Lakes region to the industrial centers located in the Midwest on the southern end of the Great Lakes. The season typically runs from late March to mid-January, ending due to the formation of ice on the lakes. Sometimes this is sooner or later depending upon the weather. Now let's really start to pick this apart. Great Lakes freighters like the Edmund Fitzgerald and the Carl D. Bradley have iconic-looking designs that are easily recognizable as lakers, and this design became the way it is through years of innovation. By the late 1860s, most bulk cargo was still aboard sailing ships and unpowered barges, and these ships usually had accessible deck hatches. These deck hatches were convenient for loading and unloading the cargo. However, around this same time, passenger steamboats were growing more and more popular for their steam-powered abilities, which was much more reliable and quicker. The first modern Great Lakes freighter, SS R.J. Hackett, was launched in 1869, and she was a wood-hulled steamer that was 208 feet long. She was specifically designed for the iron ore trade and had an experimental design that would become the standard for later lakers. She had a raised pilot house at the bow, situated on top of a set of cabins, and a boxy hull to maximize cargo space. Between her raised forecastle and her engine funnel on the stern was a long, unbroken deck line with hatches that were 24 feet apart. They were spaced that far apart because it lined up perfectly with the chutes of the Gravity Ore Dock in Marquette, Michigan. Because of the falls of the St. Mary's River, ships had to portage their cargo 1.25 miles around the falls. Portaging, for those unfamiliar with the term, is the act of carrying a boat or its cargo between navigable waters. So, essentially, the cargo had to be transferred to a different ship or floated to safety while the ship navigated to the next body of water safely. To make shipping more profitable and efficient, Michigan representatives appealed to the federal government for funding in order to build a canal safe enough for ships to pass through. In 1885, the Michigan State Locks, now called the Soo Locks, opened, and this allowed lakers to keep up with demands for iron ore from further east. This innovation fanned the flames for the development of bulk carriers on the Great Lakes. Early on, lakers had a wooden hull or a composite hull made from an oak frame wrapped in iron plating. Over time, high-quality timber near the lake shore became sparser and sparser, so shipbuilders started moving toward metal hulls. In 1881 and 1882, the first entirely iron-hulled freighters were launched, SS Brunswick and SS Onoko. Around this time, steel was quickly becoming a standard hull material as a result of the Bessemer process, making it much more affordable. The Bessemer process was the first inexpensive industrial process for the mass production of steel from molten pig iron before the development of the open hearth furnace. It looks like a giant egg, and that's where all the iron's impurities are removed by oxidation, with air being blown through the molten iron. This made cheap, high-quality steel, and the first steel-hulled freighter, SS Spokane, was launched in 1886. Both iron and composite hulls were discontinued shortly after this, and wood was still used for smaller ships into the early 1900s. An early variation of Lakers was the whaleback boat, a type of cargo steamship with a curved hull that went underwater like a whale and was designed by Alexander McDougall. It looked like the top of a submarine sticking out of the water with a flat deck, pilot house, and crew area on top. Their bodies were cylindrical and cigar-shaped, just barely coming out of the water when fully loaded, and they operated from 1888 through 1970. The early iterations of lake freighters required that cargo be manually unloaded, or with assistance from unloading machinery at the docks. This, naturally, was a pain in the neck, and so in 1902, the first ship to be retrofitted with self-unloading equipment came about, SS Hennepin, and this allowed her cargo to be landed in a fraction of the time. In 1916, 600-foot vessels started to become, more or less, the standard size for freighters. After World War II ended in September of 1945, many ocean freighters and tankers were taken to the Great Lakes and converted to bulk carriers in order to save money and acquire ships in the most cost-effective way. Several of them are actually still in service today, including the oil tanker USS Chihuahua, which is now the bulk freighter Lee A. Tregurtha. The freighter Outer Island that is in service today was originally commissioned as LCT-203 for use as a landing craft tank during World War II. In the mid-20th century, there were 300 Lakers working the lakes, but now moving into the beginning of the 21st century, there were fewer than 140 active Lakers. In the 1990s, older and smaller self-unloaders and straight-deck freighters converted into tug barges. Ships had to be transformed and modernized on the Great Lakes. And we bring a fresh, modern take to ship history. If you are enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and their wrecks, check out our main show, Shipwreck Sunday, every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Alright, now let's look at the different types of Lakers and their cargo. The types of lake freighters on the Great Lakes can be differentiated by how they are used, and this includes location, design, size, and other factors. They don't always fit neatly into one category either. Some of the types include the following: Laker, which is a bulk carrier operating primarily in the upper Great Lakes; longboats, Lakers noted for their slender appearance; ore boat or iron boat, a bulk carrier used primarily to transport iron ore and taconite pellets; Salty. A salty is an ocean-going Seaway Max vessel that accesses the Great Lakes through the St. Lawrence Seaway. Self-unloader, a lake freighter equipped with self-unloading gear. Stern ender, a lake freighter with all cabins and pilot house in the stern section. Straight decker, a freighter built without conveyors and cranes to offload cargo, instead utilizing port facilities. And a tug barge, a bulk carrier created by pairing barges, or former self-loaders and straight-deckers, paired with a tugboat. Those are our main general types, and some of the newer classes of Lakers include the Equinox class, dry bulk lake freighters that entered service in the 2010s, 2 of which are gearless bulk freighters, and 3 are self-unloading vessels; the Trillium class, built for Canada Steamship Lines; and the River class, the first of which entered service in 2022. Now let's look at the cargo. In 2023, the Great Lakes saw 81.4 million tons of cargo shipped across them. The most common cargoes are taconite, limestone, grain, salt, coal, cement, gypsum, and sand. The cargo was loaded in large contiguous holds and not loaded into steel containers. The iron ore transported from the upper Great Lakes mostly supplies steel mills located in the Midwest, and iron ore is the main cargo that is hauled. In the 1940s, taconite pellets were on the rise as sources of higher quality ore diminished. Coal-fired power plants, highway department salt domes, and stone docks where limestone is unloaded for the construction industry are other destinations you'll see a lake freighter. U.S. flagged freighters carried the largest portion of the trade, accounting for 2/3 of all cargo by weight. U.S. holds carried the majority of the limestone, iron, and cement, while Canadian ships carried most of the potash and almost all of the salt and grain moved on the lakes. Because of their deeper draft and freshwater's lower buoyancy, salties will often only take partial loads on the lakes. Conversely, the Seaway allows smaller lake freighters access to the Atlantic Ocean, with larger and newer ships restricted to the upper Great Lakes. As for the average lifespan of a Great Lakes freighter, they are typically designed and constructed for a 45 to 50-year service life, which is much longer than ocean-faring bulk carriers. As of 2023, ocean-going bulk carriers average an 11-year service life, partially because of the corrosive effects of saltwater. Some Lakers are known to have incredibly long careers, like SS St. Mary's Challenger. She was launched in 1906 and worked independently up into 2013. She is still in service as a barge currently at 118 years old. SS E.M. Ford had one of the longest careers, being built in 1898 and sold for scrap in 2008, a career of 110 years. However, not all freighters get to have their long career. There is a long history of shipwrecks, storms, groundings, and collisions on the Great Lakes. Thousands of ships and thousands of lives have been lost on the lakes, many involving cargo ships. According to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum located in Michigan, they estimate 6,000 ships and 30,000 lives have been lost on the Great Lakes, not all of which have been found. Early on in 1679, Le Griffon, loaded with furs, was lost in a storm. And in 1975, SS Edmund Fitzgerald would be lost to a nasty November storm. David D. Swayze has compiled a list which details over 4,750 well-documented shipwrecks, mostly of commercial ships, as well as a list of over 5,000 victims in those sinkings. Maritime historian Mark Thompson has reported that based upon nautical records, nearly 6,000 shipwrecks happened on the Great Lakes just between 1878 and 1994, with roughly a quarter of those being listed as total losses with around 1,166 lives lost. Whatever the total number is, it does need to be noted that a life at sea on the Great Lakes is a difficult, dangerous job. There are ships involved in lesser incidents too, including ones that are not deadly. This includes groundings, collisions with objects, being iced in during winter trips, and shipboard fires. There's a lot of preventative procedures and resources in place to keep ships and their sailors safe, so it is not nearly as dangerous as it used to be. Traditionally, November was the last month of shipping before the winter layup and lake freeze-up. During November, nasty November storms can be quite deadly, accounting for a large number of accidents on the lakes. One study showed that over half of the strandings and 1/3 of all vessels sunk between 1900 and 1950 were lost in the month of November. Ships after 1950 weren't necessarily safe either, including SS Carl D. Bradley in November of 1958, SS Daniel J. Morrell in November of 1966, and SS Edmund Fitzgerald in November of 1975, three of the most famous shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Great Lakes shipping is still a huge part of society in the Midwest of the United States and in the eastern part of Canada, providing materials, food, and jobs for thousands of people in the area. While the job may be dangerous, it is necessary, and I thank all of the brave men and women who have chosen this trade and continue to provide for those of us unable or unwilling to make such a sacrifice. Rest in peace to all of those lost in the Great Lakes shipping disasters, and I hope their families have found solace. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our Great Lakes Freighters and Ships playlist in the cards. Stay tuned this Sunday for the story of P.S. Lady Elgin, one of the worst maritime disasters in the history of the Great Lakes. Thank you for tuning into Fast Facts Friday, have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you next time.